Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take that fire hose of information you send our way, and we try to distill it down into the knowledge you really need, maybe throw in some surprising facts, some historical context along the way.
Mm.
And today, well, we're tackling something big, a paradox, really, of our modern tech age. We're calling it the dilemma of scale.
It really is a dilemma. You see this tension, right, between what a technology wants to be or says it wants to be and what actually happens when it gets huge.
Exactly. These platforms, especially the ones designed for connecting everyone, they almost always launch with these, well, utopian missions, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Make the world more open, connect everyone, democratize information, all of that. Sounds great on paper.
But our sources, the ones you sent us, they really dig into what happens next. When that massive global scale collides head-on with, let's face it, basic human drives, profit, power.
Yeah, and that's when the connection, the very thing it was built for, can kind of flip. It becomes a mechanism for, well, exploitation, division even.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to really examine the consequences of hitting that kind of scale. We're looking at how this ambition for total dominance in social networking. It's not entirely new, is it?
Not at all. It mirrors these deeper, sometimes darker historical patterns. You see the same dynamics of power, control, sometimes outright corruption across totally different industries. Think 19th century oil barons.
Or modern high finance, yeah. The core question we're wrestling with is this kind of corporate ruthlessness just baked into the process of scaling up? Or is it more a failure of governance, of oversight?
It's fascinating because the speed and the scale of modern tech feel new, right? Unprecedented. But that raw ambition, that desire for absolute market control, that's an old story.
Yeah. And the initial promise, I mean, connecting billions of people across the globe instantly,
Yeah.
it was incredibly appealing.
Who wouldn't be drawn to that? A flat world, instant chat, access to everything.
But then you build this global machine, this infrastructure with unbelievable reach. And it seems almost inevitable that this concentrated power gets leveraged, it gets exploited.
Mm-hmm. And often it feels like the platform itself starts working against its own users. For profit, obviously, but sometimes, like you said, it becomes an engine for pulling people apart, not bringing them together.
And that's the tension, right? That's the core of the dilemma. It forces you, it forces us to step back and reevaluate.
Exactly. When the downsides, the control, the manipulation, the way our data gets exposed, when those become so widespread, so baked in, you have to ask, do they actually start to outweigh the original benefits, that promise of connection?
Our sources seem to suggest we might already be there, or at least getting very close to that tipping point.
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack how they achieve that scale. Because this kind of dominance, it doesn't just happen through having a good idea or people liking your service. It feels much more strategic.
Oh, it's deeply strategic. It's
Yeah.
a deliberate, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, ruthlessly aggressive strategy. Hypergrowth combined with systematically taking out any potential threats.
That seems to be the core finding here. When you look at the big tech giants, especially how they handled acquiring potential competitors, it wasn't just about buying cool features or talented teams, was it?
No, not primarily. Our sources lay out this really sophisticated four-pronged strategy, and it was all aimed squarely at total market consolidation, dominance.
4 key reasons for just swallowing the competition whole, to make sure no rival could ever really get big enough to challenge them. Let's break those down, because they say a lot about the priorities. It sounds like market control trumped everything else.
Pretty much. The first reason was, interestingly, almost financial engineering. It was tied to perception, to confidence.
Well, so?
Well, the belief was that the parent company's stock, which was already flying high because everyone believed in its dominance, would just automatically lift the value of whatever company it bought. Over time, the acquisition would be worth more just because it was owned by the giant.
Huh. So it wasn't just buying technology, it was reinforcing the financial story of the main company itself, like a self-fulfilling prophecy based on market faith.
Precisely. An investment that pays off simply because the market believes you're unstoppable?
Okay, that's one. What was the second reason? You said it was defensive.
Right. Strategic defense. Buying a competitor instantly takes a major potential threat off the board. You stop them from copying your main features, sure, but more importantly, you prevent them from growing into a real, large-scale challenger that could steal away users' time and attention.
So nipping rivals in the bud. Preemptive neutralization.
Exactly. Defanging them before they get dangerous.
And the third reason, you mentioned it touches on the operational scale. We're talking about something a small startup just can't match.
That's absolutely key. When a giant acquires a smaller company, that smaller company suddenly gets access to the entire operational infrastructure of the parent. Think about that.
Massive server farms, reliable global networks.
Sophisticated engineering processes, security teams, legal teams, and critically, access to huge pools of really specialized expert talent. These are things a startup might spend years, literally billions, trying to build and get right.
And the acquisition just hands it to them overnight. Instant maturity, instant stability.
Right. It shortcuts years of struggle.
Okay, so financial engineering, eliminating threats, operational infrastructure.
Yeah.
What was the fourth reason? You said it was maybe the most important, defining the sort of secret sauce of hypergrowth.
Yeah, this one's crucial. It was about learning the recipe for growth itself. And this wasn't just about code or features. It was about mastering user psychology at scale.
What does that mean in practice?
It means understanding exactly how to use notifications, reminder emails, push alerts relentlessly to keep people coming back. It means figuring out how to remove every tiny bit of friction from the sign-up process.
Making it effortless to join.
Effortless. And then developing this incredibly deep, granular understanding of user data, what people click on, what they share, how long they look at something. And finally, learning how to constantly play defense against the next potential disruptive startup that might be coming along.
Wow. So the executives running these acquired apps, they were essentially told, learn this data playbook.
That was the message, often explicitly. Mastering that data-driven recipe, understanding the metrics, that was framed as the single most important thing they could do to make their app, truly important one day. It became the priority.
And while they were buying up or neutralizing competitors this way, they were also using their existing power, their control over the main platform, to kind of squeeze the remaining rivals.
Oh, absolutely. The sources, internal documents sometimes, show clear efforts were made to basically dial down the visibility, the algorithmic reach of rival hashtags.
Like the example you mentioned, hashtag Vine, when Vine was a competitor.
Exactly. Making it harder for posts using that tag to spread organically on the main platform. And it went further. Prominent users, influencers, they were actively discouraged, sometimes subtly, sometimes maybe less subtly, from displaying competitor usernames in their profiles. Like, don't put your Snapchat handle here.
Wow. So it's a really comprehensive strategy. Control the landscape, dominate attention, block off the escape routes.
Total ecosystem control. Keep users locked in, keep competitors locked out.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting for me. This relentless focus on growth, on metrics, on attention. It didn't just shape the companies. It fundamentally changed the culture of the users themselves, didn't it?
Massively. You see this huge shift. Early platforms, or maybe the original ideals of some platforms, might have focused on things like art, creativity, spontaneous sharing.
Yeah, just expressing yourself.
Right. But that gets warped. The acquiring company injects its own core DNA, this culture of constant measurement, A/B testing everything, optimizing for engagement, this relentless data-driven hustle into all the platforms it owns, even the ones that started out with a totally different vibe.
And the psychological impact of that. Our sources talk about this blurring line between being a person online and being a brand.
It's profound, isn't it? And it's driven almost entirely by this obsession with measurement, with trend analysis, with seeing how your content performs.
So if every single thing you post, every interaction, every like you get is a data point being tracked,
then your communication stops being purely spontaneous. It can't be. It becomes strategic, calculated. You become self-conscious about how it will land, how it will perform. It turns into a performance.
You're not just sharing a moment from your life. You're optimizing a post for an algorithm that determines who sees it, how much reach it gets, essentially determining your relevance.
Oh, exactly. Users are constantly, subtly being trained to optimize their own behavior, to feed the machine what it wants, which is engagement. You end up internalizing the platform's metrics as your own goals.
That phrase from the source has really stuck with me. The hustle for growth and relevance, backed by data, has become the drumbeat of modern life online.
It really captures it. Even if a platform began with ideals about, say, authentic creativity, the moment it plugs into that data-driven parent company culture, it starts prioritizing performance metrics, engagement numbers, follower counts. Those become the markers of success, often over actual artistic merit or just genuine, unmeasured interaction.
Think about the mental load of that.
Yeah.
Living in a constant state of self-optimization, turning your own life and interactions into strategic inputs for a machine, it's exhausting.
It is. And this whole drive for massive connection, for measurable data points, it inevitably bumps up against traditional ideas about privacy, doesn't it? It forces a redefinition of what private even means online.
And this wasn't an accident. It seems like it was a conscious choice, an ideological stance right from the top.
Very much so, according to the sources. While, say, the founder of a major platform like Facebook might have supported giving users options, granular controls over their data.
Which they technically often do.
Right, the controls often exist somewhere. But fundamentally, there was this core belief, this driving conviction from the founder that people were just rapidly losing interest in keeping their data private, that the tide was inevitably moving towards more sharing, more openness.
And that belief then shaped the design choices.
It became a powerful internal justification for constantly pushing the design, the defaults, towards more exposure of user information, making sharing easier, making privacy settings harder to find or understand. The default setting became open.
But the exposure wasn't just about what you put on your profile, was it? It spread way beyond the platform itself.
No, and that's where the technical architecture of scale really comes into play. Tools like Facebook Connect are central here.
Explain that for listeners who might not know the term.
So, Facebook Connect is basically a tool that allows you to log into other websites or apps using your Facebook account. Convenient, right? One less password to remember.
It seems harmless enough.
But the way it's designed,
Oh,
it creates this massive data pipeline. Any third-party website using it, and we're talking over 80,000 websites now, including roughly half of the biggest sites globally.
half. That's huge.
Huge. They can tap into your basic user information, sometimes your friend list, with your permission, of course, when you log in. But the key is the flow back.
What flows back?
When you use Facebook Connect, you're essentially allowing that external site, maybe it's a news site you read, an online store you shop at, a streaming service you use to send reports back to Facebook.
Reports about what?
Detailed reports about your activity on their site, what articles you read, what products you looked at or bought, what videos you watched. That specific activity gets sent back into Facebook's data infrastructure.
And Facebook uses that data to, what? Target ads better?
That's a big part of it, definitely. Refining the algorithms, making the ads incredibly specific, but it also feeds back into your newsfeed, shaping the content you see, suggesting articles, groups, pages based on your activity across the web. It creates this incredibly deep integrated profile that blurs the lines between the platform and basically the entire internet you interact with.
Okay, so we've got this picture. A ruthless drive for scale, architecture designed for data extraction. But when we pull back, look at the bigger historical picture, this kind of corporate behavior, this predation. It's not exactly new, is it?
Not even close.
Right.
That's one of the most crucial insights from the sources we looked at, the tactics we see from today's tech giants. They're echoes. They resonate strongly with how industrial power brokers operated in the past, just maybe, accelerated by digital technology.
Like who? Give us an example.
Well, think about Bill Gates, someone who really defined that first wave of massive tech dominance with Microsoft.
What was his approach to competitors?
According to the sources, it was absolutely relentless, almost existential. The strategy was described in really stark terms. You smash people. You either make them line up or you smash them. That was the mentality.
Wow. Zero-sum game.
Completely. Gates apparently surrounded himself with people who shared that same kind of predatory winner-takes-all view, and that really set a precedent in the tech world, didn't it? If you want total dominance, you have to be willing to, well, destroy anyone blocking your path.
And that attitude, that goes back even further to the people who built the industrial economy itself. Like John D. Rockefeller Sr. with Standard Oil. He wasn't just competing, he wanted total control of the physical infrastructure.
Rockefeller's vision for oil control was chillingly direct. He apparently didn't even try to hide it. He'd warn rivals his plan was bound to work. Meaning absolute control. There was no chance for anyone outside. He saw that just trying to manage a loose group of competing companies was messy and inefficient. He wanted to own or control them all directly.
So how did he use his existing scale, his power, to bring rivals into line?
He had this tactic of offering them running arrangements. Basically, he'd go to a competitor and guarantee them profits, steady money, which is obviously tempting for a smaller player.
No, but there was a catch.
Of course. The catch was they had to agree to strict limits on how much oil they could produce, ceilings set by Rockefeller. By controlling their output, he effectively turned the entire industry into a cartel that he administered, long before OPEC ever existed.
That's a powerful historical parallel to modern platforms, isn't it? If you can't buy your competitors outright, you control the essential infrastructure they rely on, whether it's oil pipelines or, today, maybe data flows and algorithms.
Exactly. Control the rails, control the game.
And we see that same kind of calculated systemic pressure in modern retail too, right?
Yeah.
Like with Amazon. Their approach to competition seems similarly fierce.
Absolutely. Amazon's famous for being customer-obsessed, right? But the sources show that focus is matched by an equally intense, almost ruthless approach to competitors, and even sometimes their own partners.
Damaging or destroying competitors, the sources say.
Yes. Instrumental in the decline or outright failure of competitors, both big and small. And we're not just talking about small local shops. These were major national and international chains: Circuit City, Borders, Best Buy, Barnes & Noble, giants in their day.
So that relentless pressure, systematically chipping away at rivals until they collapse. That's core to how some modern monopolies build and keep their scale.
It seems to be a key part of the playbook for achieving that kind of unprecedented dominance today.
Okay, this raises a huge question. Once these companies achieve this immense financial power, this massive scale, how do they protect it? How do they shield themselves from regulations, from investigations, from legal challenges that might try to rein them in?
That's where the next layer comes in. They actively work to exploit regulatory loopholes, or maybe just the gaps in regulation, and they apply quiet, consistent political leverage.
It's like their sheer size gives them altitude sickness immunity. The rules that apply down below just don't seem to stick up there.
That's a good way to put it. The scale of their financial power creates a different operating environment. We can see this pattern really clearly if we look at the history of some powerful business figures in Asia, sometimes called the Asian Godfathers.
How do they navigate the rules or operate above them?
Well, take someone like Li Ka-shing in Hong Kong. His career, according to the sources, is marked by this long series of, well, inexplicable exemptions from standard stock market rules. Things that just shouldn't have happened according to the regulations.
How did he get those exemptions?
In several key cases, the financial secretary, a top government official, actually stepped in and personally overruled the stock exchange's own takeover committee to grant Li these special permissions. Other tycoons, like Francis Ye's YTL Corp., apparently received huge power contracts, guaranteeing massive cash flow, often without any open bidding process, sometimes even getting subsidized fuel.
So it's not always that the laws don't exist. It's more about whether there's the political will to actually enforce them against the biggest, most connected players.
Exactly. The failure of political actors, of regulators, to consistently and rigorously enforce the norms, that's arguably just as important as any lack of specific laws in allowing this kind of concentration of power to happen. It creates a system that feels rigged in favor of the giants.
It sounds like the ultimate power play, kind of like what Howard Hughes was doing decades ago, right? He had this very basic belief about money and influence.
Absolutely. Hughes operated on this simple, almost crude political equation. He just assumed that if you made the right amount of money and the right kinds of favors available to the right people in power, well, you'd produce the right result.
What kind of favors are we talking about? It sounds shadowy.
It could be anything, really. Straight cash payments, sure. But also granting lucrative personal favors, maybe setting someone up with a cushy job, a sinecure in one of his companies where they didn't have to do much, or funding lavish trips, all expenses paid.
And the goal was always calculation.
Meticulously calculated. The whole point was to secure these quiet understandings, to ensure that high-level government officials would look the other way or actively protect his often complex and legally questionable business interests without making a fuss. It's about achieving regulatory capture before you even need it. Preemptive protection.
Okay, so we've seen how scale is built through acquisition, through operational dominance, and how it's protected through regulatory influence. Now we need to talk about the third pillar, how that accumulated power gets used to actively shape public opinion, manipulate policy debates, and even corrupt the information we all consume.
Right. This is where the economic power translates directly into narrative control, and it's often used to push for policy outcomes that primarily benefit the powerful, but it's disguised as something else, maybe public good or nonpartisan research.
The strategic use of political funding, dark money, seems like a prime example here.
It's a perfect illustration of the mechanism. We hear the term dark money a lot, but how does it actually work to shield the donors while influencing policy?
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, you see organizations like the Koch Foundations, for instance. They distribute millions, tens of millions, in tax-deductible grants. These grants go to groups that present themselves as nonpartisan think tanks or advocacy groups.
But they have a clear viewpoint.
Overwhelmingly, yes. These groups consistently promote laissez-faire economics, deregulation, libertarian ideas. By channeling the money through these tax-deductible foundations and nonprofits, the corporate or wealthy individual donors mask their direct involvement. The advocacy then appears grassroots or purely intellectual.
When really its main purpose might be to protect the donor's specific business interests.
Often, yes. The sources highlight a really successful campaign they ran back in the Clinton era to defeat a proposed energy tax, sometimes called the BTU tax.
And they saw that tax as a direct threat.
Their internal assessment was stark, yeah. They believed the tax may have destroyed our business, so the motivation was existential for them. But look how they thought it publicly.
How do they frame it?
Their PR campaign, their ads, they didn't focus on the burden to their large corporation. No, they used these exaggerated scare tactics. They focused on how the tax would supposedly crush mom-and-pop businesses, ordinary families, even though the tax was primarily designed to hit the wealthiest 4%.
That's classic misdirection.
And incredibly effective. The sources mention the donors found the secrecy exhilarating, no spending limits, few restrictions, and crucially, no public disclosure of who was actually funding the campaign. It worked. The tax was defeated.
That feels very connected to the kind of polarization we see in media today, where the goal isn't just to report, but to simplify things, turn complex issues or opponents into easily identifiable villains.
It feels like a feedback loop, doesn't it? Some sources detail the shift in certain cable news environments where the directive became to be intentionally hotter and louder.
What did that mean practically?
Anchors being encouraged or even told to use really polarizing language, calling adversaries things like dirtbag or monster. There was apparently an explicit editorial stance. We don't sit around and get all gooey and wonder if these people have been misunderstood in their childhood.
No nuance allowed.
None. Just intentional simplification, polarization. It drives engagement. It keeps viewers tuned in. And it mirrors those aggressive corporate tactics, right? Identify the threat, simplify the narrative about them, and then attack or smash them.
And in today's digital world, that kind of manipulation, that narrative control, can get tangled up in really strange ways with the personality of the platform owner themselves, right? Potentially putting the whole business at risk.
That's a uniquely modern twist on the scale problem. Advertisers, the people paying the bills for these platforms, started getting nervous. They saw one major social platform becoming less like a predictable business and more like an expansion of its owner's personal, well, flaws and quirks, as the sources put it.
That introduces a whole new level of instability.
Completely. Especially when the owner publicly admits things like, I'm going to tweet some things that are going to be stupid. That doesn't exactly reassure your corporate partners or stabilize the business outlook. When a massive global platform becomes tied to the whims of one outsized, unpredictable personality, the chaos of that personality can ripple through the entire operation.
It really seems like across politics, media, finance, trust is the first casualty. It's the asset that gets leveraged, twisted, and exploited for profit, sometimes with truly devastating results.
And you see that principle leveraging trust for profit in its most alarming form when it comes to product deception. When a corporation uses its scale, its marketing power, to intentionally distort crucial information about a potentially harmful product. The Purdue Pharma story with OxyContin is just a horrifying example.
It really is staggering. How did they manage to pull off that level of systematic deception on a national scale? It seems unbelievable.
The strategy was terrifyingly clever because it targeted the source of information for doctors. Purdue explicitly told its sales reps to focus their energy on opioid-naive doctors.
Meaning doctors who hadn't prescribed strong opioids much before.
Exactly. Physicians with little or no experience with drugs like morphine or oxycodone. For these doctors, the Purdue sales rep often became their primary, maybe their only, source of information about this new drug, OxyContin.
So Purdue controlled the information flow to the least experienced prescribers.
Precisely. And then they carefully managed the language. Sales reps were strictly instructed not to use words like powerful when describing OxyContin.
Why? That seems counterintuitive if you're selling a painkiller.
Because the company knew that word might immediately trigger concerns, make doctors wary about addiction potential. They actively worked to create and maintain this completely false perception that oxycodone, the active ingredient, was somehow weaker, less risky than morphine.
When the reality was.
The reality was it's about twice as strong. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, high-stakes strategy of distorting information to maximize sales, pushing a highly addictive drug while downplaying its risks.
And sometimes the deception isn't about hiding a physical danger like addiction, but about selling a completely false story, right? Using narrative to pull in huge amounts of money based on hype, ignoring the underlying reality, like WeWork.
That's the perfect financial parallel, leveraging a compelling narrative to mask fundamental weaknesses. WeWork reached this astronomical valuation, nearly $50 billion at its peak?
Insane for a company leasing office space.
Exactly. Its actual financials were terrible, deep in the red, burning through billions just to operate. But the valuation wasn't based on financials. It was based on the story Adam Neumann was selling.
The community story, the tech play angle.
Right. A prominent real estate investor, Barry Sternlicht, nailed it. He said if WeWork had just been pitched as a regular real estate company subleasing offices, its valuation would have been tiny, rational. But Neumann dressed it up, made it about community, and crucially, turned it into a tech play.
And investors bought this story, even sophisticated ones.
They bought the story. The narrative allowed them to overlook the massive documented losses. They bought into this vision of a revolutionary, global, community-driven tech giant.
So they prioritized the growth narrative over the financial reality, basically assuming they could just pass the risk along to the next round of investors or eventually dump it on the public market through an IPO.
That seems to be the mentality. It thrives in environments with lots of hype, rapid growth narratives, and crucially, access to cheap, abundant capital. You see similar dynamics in other areas too, like high-frequency trading.
How so?
Well, you had firms, like Alameda Research was cited, that had access to just vast amounts of cheap capital borrowing at maybe 6% interest. That access allowed them to make huge bets and generate enormous raw trading profits, like $1 billion 2 years running.
Was it genius trading or just access to money?
The sources suggest the key wasn't necessarily some secret trading genius, but simply having guaranteed access to that massive leveraged pool of liquidity, and then propagating the narrative of unstoppable exponential growth to keep attracting even more capital. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle fueled by story and cheap money.
So when we look at this whole arc, historical patterns, modern tech, finance, what does it tell us about innovation and power itself? It really feels like every time humanity creates something powerful and new, whether it's a global network or a new way to trade stocks, these same problems of scale, exploitation, and control just pop right back up.
It strongly suggests that any really big technological shift, any rapid expansion into a new area of society is almost guaranteed to face some sort of backlash, as one source put it. It really highlights this constant, incredibly difficult tightrope walk for the leaders of these huge entities.
How do you mean?
How do you keep pushing the envelope, aggressively building products and services that are right on the edge of what's possible technically and maybe even legally, while also managing a massive global user base that might be resistant to change or skeptical, or managing a huge, potentially fragile financial empire? It's an inherent tension.
And when the guardrails and the regulations, the oversight are missing or just can't keep up with the speed of innovation, the potential for chaos, for systemic risk, seems enormous.
We've seen that play out dramatically in finance over the decades. Think about the high-stakes, pretty ruthless world of Drexel Burnham back in the 80s, which ultimately imploded under investigations and its own internal pressures.
Or more recently, the whole complex world of high-frequency trading and dark pools.
Exactly. These systems, built for speed and opacity, become inherently fragile. They're prone to chaos when regulation is weak or deliberately sidestepped.
You mentioned the complexity of Wall Street structure, that spider network.
Yeah.
How did that specific complexity create vulnerabilities?
Well, the market became dominated by these high-speed traders who weren't necessarily making better investing decisions. They were just exploiting tiny fractions of a second differences in when they got information. The system was optimized for speed, not necessarily fair access.
And the creation of IEX, the Investors Exchange, that was a direct response to that.
It was. As described in one source, the founders' goal wasn't really to try and kill off the predators, the high-speed firms. It was to eliminate the opportunity for the kill.
Oh.
By intentionally slowing things down just a tiny bit, injecting a minuscule delay, a speed bump in the routing of orders. Basically putting a little bit of friction back into a system that had become obsessed with zero-latency exploitation, trying to level the playing field slightly.
So Bringing it all together, the synthesis of this deep dive seems to be this. The fundamental challenge, whether we're talking social media or finance, is how do we govern and regulate things operating at an unprecedented global scale? Especially when the very tools designed for connection or efficiency can be so easily repurposed into machines for exploitation, division, or unfair advantage.
That really is the persistent, maybe the defining challenge of our current era. It doesn't almost matter what the specific driver is, whether it's an algorithm blindly optimizing for engagement clicks or an old school tycoon determined to crush competitors and secure special government favors. The underlying dynamic is the same. It's about the unchecked concentration of power that comes with overwhelming scale.
Even the founder of a major platform seemed to acknowledge this inherent difficulty, didn't they?
Yeah, there's a quote about the biggest challenge being leading the user base through the changes that need to continue to happen. Recognizing that pushing forward technologically while managing this massive public entity, prone to skepticism and backlash, is incredibly hard.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? We've explored how this hustle for growth and relevance, backed by data, seems to become the default operating system, the drumbeat of modern life online. It applies to individuals building their brand. It applies to multinational corporations.
And if almost every part of our lives, how we communicate, who we connect with, how we see ourselves, what we buy is increasingly being funneled through these hyper-optimized, measurable, monetizable platforms, we really have to stop and think about the moral cost, the human cost of demanding that everything be optimized. It's an exhausting way to live, constantly performing for the data machine.
And that leads us to the final provocative question we want to leave you with, something to think about long after this deep dive is over. If this drive for efficiency, for optimization, for monetization is allowed to dominate more and more of our public and private lives, what parts of human experience should remain intentionally unmeasured? What aspects of life should be considered sacredly, definitively unmonetizable?